This video is sponsored by Card Kingdom. To pre-order Foundations, use my link in the description. Hi everyone, I'm Nitsahone, and in this video I'm wrapping up the card-by-card portion of my Foundations set review. I've already looked at all the cards in the main set, and the only other cards that can appear in play boosters are the 10 special guests. These are 10 incredibly rare cards that take up a common slot in 1.5% of play boosters, and they're all reprints. When evaluating these cards for Foundations Limited, I'm going to sum up my thoughts using a letter grade. If you're not familiar with my grading system, you can find an explanation in the description. Alright, let's take a look at the 10 special guests in Foundations. First, there's Condemn, which for 1 white mana is an instant, and it says put target attacking creature on the bottom of its owner's library. Its controller gains life equal to its toughness. Swords to Plowshares, this is not. Only hitting attacking creatures is very narrow, and it makes it the kind of removal an aggro deck isn't very happy to play. Its efficiency definitely matters, even though it's narrow, and it's enough for it to be a C+, but yeah, it's way too narrow to be premium. Next up, it's Sphinx's Tutelage, which for 2 generic and a blue is an enchantment. Whenever you draw a card, target opponent mills 2 cards. If 2 non-land cards that share a color were milled this way, repeat this process, and you can pay 5 generic and a blue to draw a card, then discard a card. I often talk about how mill win conditions rarely work out in Limited, and the exceptions prove the rule. Well, Tutelage is one of those exceptions. This was a legitimate mill win condition in Magic Origins, as playing a blue deck with a whole bunch of ways to draw extra cards quickly milled your opponent out. Of course, Tutelage was also at uncommon in that format, so getting multiples was doable, and that's effectively impossible in this format since the special guests are so rare. Still, I think this can work out well in the right deck. It definitely needs a build-around grade, because your deck has to be built for the long game and have lots of efficient ways to draw cards, with creatures who draw cards the most attractive because, they add to the board and they'll make the game go longer. But if you can do that, it's like a B, but yeah, it's probably an F in most blue decks. Next up, it's Grim Tutor, which for 1 generic and 2 black is a sorcery. Search your library for a card, put that card into your hand, then shuffle, you lose 3 life. This is terrible in Limited. It's funny that every special guest sheet has like 1 tutor, and I always give them Fs, and then people in the comments always tell me I'm wrong. But then the data for the set comes out and the tutor is like the worst card in the set. I get why people overrate them, especially if you're more of a commander player than anything, but in Limited you basically end up paying a huge tax on whatever the best card in your deck is when you cast this, and guess what? That card is way worse when it costs 3 extra mana and you lose 3 life, especially when the average power level of cards in your deck is pretty low because, you're playing Limited. So yeah, this is an F. Next up, it's Ember Cleave, which for 4 generic and 2 red is a legendary artifact equipment with flash. It costs 1 generic less to cast for each attacking creature you control. When it enters, attach it to target creature you control. The equipped creature gets +1/+1 and has double strike and trample, and it can equip for 3 generic. This is one of the best equipments of all time, and it's just as insane in Limited as it is in 60-card formats. It offers a massive stats boost that makes any creature into a threat, often allowing it to run over whatever's blocking it and smash in for a bunch of damage. And reducing the cost of the cleave is pretty doable, even in Limited. Even once you have to pay 3 to move it around, you're still getting a great buff that makes any creature into a threat, and this entering the battlefield at instant speed is often back-breaking and ends the game on the spot. And even when it can't quite pull that off, the game is probably still over in a few turns. It's a bomb. I'm giving it an A. Next up, it's Goblin Bushwhacker, which for 1 red mana is a 1/1 Goblin Warrior with Kicker for 1 red, and when it enters, if it was kicked, creatures you control get +1/+0 and gain haste until end of turn. This is powerful. Kicking it is very easy and very powerful on almost any board state, as it adds a ton of damage to the board for a very low cost, drastically altering your turn in a big way. Even running it out on 2 is kind of alright, and that's like the fail case. I'm giving this a B. Next up, it's Bloom Tender, which for 1 generic and a green is a 1/1 elf druid, and you can tap it, and for each color among permanents you control, add 1 mana of that color. A 2 mana 1/1 is bad, but it taps for at least 1 mana, and it can tap for 2 mana by the mid game. And that kind of mana advantage is worth the inefficient creature, although obviously it drops off the later the game goes when mana is less and less relevant, giving it a B. Next up, it's Paradise Druid, which for 1 generic and a green is a 2/1 elf druid, and has hexproof as long as it's untapped, and you can tap it to add 1 mana of any color. This is even better than Bloom Tender. While it can't tap for as much mana, it has a far more efficient body, can always make mana of any color, and the hexproof means you pretty much always get to produce the mana it offers at least once, giving this a B+. Next up, it's Akroma's Memorial, which for 7 generic is a legendary artifact. Creatures you control have flying, first strike, vigilance, trample, haste, and protection from black and red. 7 mana is a lot, but this is strong. It doesn't offer a stats boost, but giving all the Akroma keywords to your stuff can usually make your creatures into much bigger threats. Even if you're behind, you can attack with a bunch of vigilance creatures, and then your opponent can't really attack back because all your creatures have first strike. It does ask you to have a board, of course, and if you have like 2 3/3s, this isn't going to do a whole lot for you if you're behind, so it isn't always going to turn the game around, but it can turn a lot of games around, giving it a B. Next up, it's Temporal Manipulation, which for 3 generic and 2 blue is a sorcery. Take an extra turn after this one. Taking an extra turn is one of the strongest things you can do in all of Magic, and while this isn't quite as insane as the 2 mana Time Walk, the effect is still excellent at 5 mana. Taking 2 turns in a row before your opponent ever gets to do anything is great, especially if they're tapped out. They simply won't survive most of the time when that's the case. There are even ways to recur this in the format, which will be particularly silly. This gets into the lower bomb range. I'm giving it an A-. And our last special guest is Fiend Artisan, which costs 2 black-green hybrid mana. It's a 1/1 Nightmare. It gets +1/+1 for each creature card in your graveyard, and you can pay X in a black-green hybrid mana and tap it and sacrifice another creature. To search your library for a creature card with mana value X or less, put it onto the battlefield, then shuffle, activate only as a sorcery. This was pretty good in Ikoria. I mean, a 2 mana 1/1 is bad, but it will generally be larger than that and then grow throughout the game, and it'll be quite massive by the middle and later stages, especially if you're milling yourself, which, like in most formats, black decks like doing. The activated ability doesn't always line up, and tapping the Artisan and giving up another creature to search up a new one at sorcery speed isn't always great, but sometimes it lets you tutor up something that really improves a situation, like, a bomb or something. I'm giving this a B. So those are all the special guests. There's still a bunch more Foundations content coming out though, including a video on the biggest bombs in the format, an archetype guide, and draft videos. If you want to make sure to catch that content, don't forget to subscribe. If you want to catch up on the set review videos that are already out, which is all of them at this point, you should see a playlist on your screen shortly. And if you enjoyed this video, please like it and share it so that others can enjoy it too. Thanks for watching.